Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkissoon. Thanks so much for staying with us this Tuesday morning. The opposition is calling for Trinidad and Tobago to hit the streets of Port of Spain today. They're saying that the government has mishandled the affairs of the country. Joining us on set now, the political leader of the Movement for Social Justice, David Abdullah. David, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Hema. Morning, and to your viewers.
How have you been since we've last interviewed you?
I'm trying to remember when it was.
Quite a while.
That's not good. I'm fine, thanks. I'm fine.
Now, looking at today's activities, will the MSJ be supporting the PNM?
We're not supporting the PNM. Let me be very clear. The MSJ does not support the PNM. We have always been totally opposed to the policies of the PNM in government. They're presiding over this country's affairs for more than 4 decades, consolidating a governance arrangement and systems that are at the root of the country's problems, something that we have opposed all the time. But the issue of holding this government and ministers to account for the fiasco of the early proclamation of one part of the Criminal Proceedings Act, right. Section 34 of that act, surreptitiously and like a thief in the night, as I said in our statement last week, that is an issue that the MSJ is concerned about. So we are in agreement with the position that the PNM has taken with respect to ministers being held to account on this question, but we are not supporting Dr. It's not a matter of us supporting Dr. Rowley and the PNM. Of course, some people are going to say it's a fine line, a fine distinction.
Right, and that would have been my other point.
And yes, in Trinidad and Tobago, people often confuse a position on an issue that might be the same as somebody else's position on the issue as if that, you're supporting one another. That is not the case, but we think that this is a major issue about democracy and governance in Trinidad and Tobago. The issue came up in very many ways yesterday in the opening of the law term. The Chief Justice himself said, as all the headlines have indicated in the newspapers today, that the judiciary was not consulted about proclaiming one section, and they were not ready for one section and things like that. And so we had a very clear statement by the DPP on the whole process going forward. And we think MSJ is of the view, and I said that last week in our statement, that somebody must be held to account. And that is the issue that we really have to focus on today.
Today, what is happening? Will the MSJ be out on the streets as well?
I will, together with a number of party members, will be joining the demonstration today, yes, as MSJ.
And because you support the PNM's position on this issue?
We are calling, MSJ had itself called for people to be held to account last week. We felt that those who are responsible for the early proclamation and the surreptitious way in which it was done and the implications of that for major high-profile cases, and we're well aware of what those are and so on, particularly with respect to well-known UNC financiers, and that needed to be dealt with by ministerial responsibility. Ministers cannot hide and say, well, all of us debated it in Parliament. I was part of the Parliament that debated it. I myself spoke in the Senate on it and so on, and voted for that piece of legislation, which is an important piece of legislation. The whole country's agreed on that. But assurances were given that this would not be effected until certain things had been put in place. Those things have not been put in place, yet Section 34 by itself was proclaimed. And somebody has to take responsibility for it. The Prime Minister acted and dealt with Colin Patap over an alleged incident and so on. But this is far more serious than Colin Patap's alleged infraction. This one goes to the heart of commitments to the Parliament. It goes to the heart of the
But would you not agree that it's a failure of governance? And even the Law Association yesterday made the point that while fingers can be pointed to those responsible for the legislation, it was a collective effort, independent senators and lower and above.
And myself, and I agree, yes, that we did make a mistake with respect to the amended Section 34 that found its way into the law. We did make a mistake, and I will plead guilty to that as well. But that error was compounded by subsequent actions, so that after the bill was passed in the Parliament at the end of November, the Senate and it would have gone back to the lower house for the amendments that the Senate made to be approved. And everyone unanimously in both houses approved it. The issue of the appeal against the extradition decision by Justice Mudusin came up. and the Attorney General decided not to appeal. Now, having done that and having been fully aware of the implications of Section 34, other things happened, and the DPP laid it out in his statement. Information was requested about what matters would be affected by the proclamation of the bill, and it was indicated that some 40-odd matters would be affected. With that information, the government still went ahead by way of a cabinet decision on advice of a minister who brought a cabinet note and maybe support of more than one minister, and decided to proclaim Section 34 by itself. Now, it is the subsequent actions at the executive level that really have precipitated the crisis in which we now are in. And yes, the government has made an effort to retroactively fix it, and the courts will determine, I'm not a lawyer, and the courts will eventually determine whether that was sufficient or not. There are different views perhaps on whether the Parliament's action was sufficient to fix it or not. But it was that decision to do something which the Parliament had understood not to take place, which is the early proclamation of the entire act. The Parliament was given an undertaking that would not happen. And so those responsible for that proclamation of 34, that's what triggered the crisis.
Right.
It wasn't the law by itself. Yes, the law by itself had a flaw, which flaw could have been corrected by coming back to Parliament and amending it before any proclamation. And had that been done, you would have had no applications by persons for their matters to be dismissed. Are
you supporting the cause for the removal of the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice?
Yes, I think that they are the two line ministers who have the principal responsibility in this matter, and they should be removed. Or if the Prime Minister comes and says it is one and not the other, but clearly ministerial responsibility says that somebody has to be held accountable. If not, then we will have ministerial errors, to put it softly, or worse than that, misdemeanors not being dealt with. And if nobody is held to account, how are you now going to ask other citizens to hold themselves responsible and to a high level of accountability?
David, you are now going to be on the streets as well. Some members of the MSJ will also support this position. Yet a number of Labour leaders have declined the invitation, and they have stated that they will not associate with this.
Sure, and I understand that position, and it's a correct position because of the fact that, and I said that to Dr. Rawl yesterday. I had a quiet chat with him yesterday. We were both at the opening of the law term yesterday, and I pulled him aside and said, you know, the way in which he went about it was wrong. It ought to have been on the basis of discussions with groups and to have a common approach to it and so on. It ought not to have been, in my view, a party initiative,
right, because
it then leads many people in society to say that we don't wish to identify with the issue because it was called by a party. And in fact, I'm going to say that later on today, but I'll say it on your program for the first time, that in my view and in the view of the MSJ, this issue of Section 34 and some of the governance issues generally ought to come under a much broader rubric of civil society in the way in which we organized the People's Democracy in 2009 to take on a number of issues that the Manning government was doing.
But a number of the leaders that were attached, that were vocal at that time, are now part of government entities, are now holding senior positions. What does that tell you? One, about their character, or two, they're now on the other side and cannot do anything?
Well, yeah, and I don't really want... The country will judge that very clearly. And yes, there were some who marched with us and took part in that. Stephen Cadiz was very much part of People's Democracy. He drafted the section on crime and violence and so on, that we put in our demands to Mr. Manning, which he never even acknowledged. So that is true, and we dealt with matters of axing the tax and all of those things as well. But the point that I'm making is that what we need is a broader coalition of concerned interests. In other words, I'm well aware that there are groups, for example, there's a United Groups Against Corruption involving a number of civil society organizations. There are other people who are doing things and so on. And what is really required is a people's democracy to come back into existence to deal with this issue, so it is not a PNM issue.
Not a PNM issue, but an issue of democracy. I'm Hema Ramkissoon. Now take a very short break. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Do stay with us. Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkissoon. Thanks so much for staying with us this morning. We're continuing to speak with the political leader of the MSJ. David, we look at the governance structures in our country. Would you say that democracy is on the decline? Call to choose integrity is clear. Yesterday, the president made some interesting statements about where he thought the nation was, going.
Yes, there was some strong statements were made yesterday, both by the President and the Chief Justice. I think the Chief Justice pointed the way forward in terms of constitutional reform. That is a crucial issue. Unless we get the governance structures right, if the systems are not in place to have proper checks and balances. And the CJ made an interesting point. He said the Parliament really is not a check and balance on the executive, and was suggesting that the courts are going to have to be more interventionist, if you wish, in terms of being a check and balance on executive power, the abuse of executive power. So we need to get proper constitutional reform. That was one of the commitments of the partnership coming in. Nothing has happened in 2 years yet. So unless we do those things, we will continue to have people going into government, into office, and then have nonsense happening. It's not only the individuals. Yes, it's not only the individuals. Part of it is part of the problem are the individuals, but part of the problem is systemic. A major part of the problem is systemic. And unless we change that, we're going to be in serious trouble.
Now, looking at what's happening today, your members will be hitting the streets. You are supporting the PNM's position on this matter. Some of us,
we haven't done a huge mobilization to come out today. We're going to have a presence today simply to register the MSJ's position that someone must be held to account over this fiasco of Section 34. That is simply what we are saying, that somebody must be held to account. And citizens ought to and must hold ministers to account. If we don't, you see, and during the debate in the Parliament on this particular bill in November, I made the point that if people are allowed to continuously beat the system, and therefore justice does not happen, then the average citizen will not abide by the laws and rules, because they'll be cynical of the entire system. And when there's cynicism about the system, when people have no faith or trust in the system, then the society essentially will fall apart. The center can't hold, and that is the dangerous situation in which we are in now.
A couple of years ago, Botiwari was actually at that time principal of the University of the Western Indies, and he made an interesting speech about a failing nation and a failing state. Have we still gone down that path? Are we still on that path?
I think we're still on the slope, for sure. And, the silence of the Prime Minister is very noticeable on this matter. One would have thought that the Prime Minister would have taken the lead and made a clear statement of apology to the country for this decision by the Cabinet, and taken her ministers to task.
Do you think it was a deliberate